function, but you've got to understand these different perspectives, the emotions that people feel when they are using their product. If it really is more environmentally friendly, but users don't feel that way when they are using it, it's not going to work. So now, in addition to product design, even when you've got a product that is really well designed, you need to do user research for messaging as well. Uh, when I've worked with hundreds, I think the four of us here, we could probably say easily thousands of startups by now, in our joint experience and in the other activities that we've done. And I think that many startups are great at coming up with product concepts. They don't always. I think less than 10% of the startups that I talk to actually have a plan in place of how they are going to market their product, how they're going to develop their marketing strategy. And it's not enough to say, "Oh, our marketing strategy is social media and going viral." I think most presentations that I see is, "My strategy is I'm going to get influencers, I'm going to go on social media, and we're going to go viral." And that's it. And that's not the way that a market entry strategy can actually be deployed. We need to consider the messaging. Uh, Semin, you and I have done a lot of work on marketing strategy with helping startups. So, can you tell us a few of the key takeaways of why it's important to do user research to build your messaging strategy?
Right. So the product itself, the user doesn't just come in and use the product. There's a whole range of activity and a journey before they recognize it exists, learn about it, learn how to buy it, and then use it, and then eventually throw it away or stop using it. There's a whole range of activities and journey, but I think most people just focus on the part when they buy it and use it. I think that's most of the product design that goes in there. But speaking, talking about what Jose mentioned of empathy and understanding the user, it actually should happen in the messaging as well, but on different stages on time. So when they first interact with you, how are you going to communicate? Are you going to say, "Hey, this is water better," or are you going to do you should do like a softer entry for yourself? "Hey, how are you?" Like meeting a person. "Hey, how are you?" Get to know each other, and then, "So what do you do?" "I do this." "Oh, that's what you're trying to do." And then you will eventually go into a stage where, "Oh, I'm interested enough. Oh, I want to buy something for you," or, "Can I buy something from you?" So I think the easiest way to explain it is like in the real world, how you first meet a people or how you eventually build up a relationship. And I think that should be also implied into the messaging as well in the digital scene or in your marketing message. So I think that should be the big takeaway. Um, Consider it as if you're really meeting a person in person.
Yeah, I love that. I love actually, because that brings the other piece, which is, so how does the person feel when you're no longer there,
Right.
right? And they're like, "Oh man, I'm gonna call Semin because he mentioned something. I want to talk to him some more about this." Or if you like the person a lot, "Hey, I'd like to, hey, what's up? Hey, we met the other day. You wanna, catch some coffee and talk about something, right?"
Right.
And this
Or
is
if
same
you
thing
have
with your,
something,
yeah,
right.
like if your product, if they, you introduce your product, they get to know, "Hi, nice, nice, you get to know the product." But then if the product's gone, they're like, "Oh, I miss it." You know, if you get to that point, you're successful because now how does this is part of the empathy exercise. How is the person going to feel once they have your product, use your product, enjoyed your product, and if the product is no longer there, are they going to miss it? If the answer is yes, that's a good sign.
Right. Are they gonna miss it? That's definitely one part. And then um when God, are they going to think about you when you have that problem? When you're first interacting. So like water, if I'm thirsty, I had a hard workout. Am I gonna think about water at that point rather than thinking about other things? So how do you put that message into the user to think about to be in like the consideration of one thing that you're gonna take action?
Mm-hmm.
Same goes when they're not there anymore. Hey, I wish that was there. You know, I wish a bottle was here right now. I should call Simon. I'm not selling water, but yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's really funny about that is that this was a big realization that Coca-Cola had in the past decade or so. So like in the 90s, there were the big cola wars between Coke and Pepsi. Those of us that were kids at that time probably remember there was like the Pepsi challenge, right? Where you would go to a shopping mall and they would give you a blind test. And if you could choose Pepsi over Coke, you'd get a prize. There was a lot of money spent by Coke and Pepsi on these cola wars to try to convince consumers that one soda was better than the other. And as these cola wars were starting to wind down, the executives started to realize, you know what? Our real competition is not the other cola. Our real competition is everything else that people could buy whenever they are thirsty. And one key takeaway from this is that you cannot just be positioning yourself for people to make a decision. Let's say that you walk into a convenience store, 7-Eleven or a GS25 here in Korea, right? You walk into the convenience store and you go to the fridge, and the cola wars were assuming that people would look Pepsi here, Coke here, which one should I buy, right? But the real customer decision was made as they were walking through the door, not when they got to the fridge, about what they wanted to have. And you need to convince them that they want to buy your product from the wider range of options. If you are making a decision at the fridge, once you've decided to cola between Coke and Pepsi, by that point, the war is lost. And their messaging and their marketing has to attract users from the moment that they start to think, I'm thirsty, I need something to drink, I'm going to go to the convenience store. And you want to have the idea in their head before they go to the fridge of what it is that they're going to be looking for. And you want to guide them towards thinking about your brand earlier on.
Right. And I think you mentioned a great point about the cola wars. I was going to say Pepsi wars with that cola wars. What also happened was the customer preference changed. Obesity was a big problem. People weren't drinking sugar anymore. They were drinking something else. They were drinking juice. I mean, juice has a lot of sugar, but they were finding different alternatives. Like coffee came up, tea came up, bottled water came up a lot when the wars happened. So it's it. Another key takeaway I would want to mention is once because you have a clear messaging that you had with the customer doesn't mean that you're done for life. It's always constantly changing. You always have to figure out what the customers want in a given time.
Right. And I
You
think
know,
that
I was listening to a keynote yesterday by Michelle Obama, and she was saying that the number one beverage in the United States last year was bottled water, and that's a positive, right? I mean, compared to the alternative, which used to be soda and juice and whatever else. So these people, you know, maybe they're onto something because it's obviously a big market. There's a lot of water being sold.
oops. All right. Give me a sec. Sorry. I advanced the slide by accident. I think that's yeah. I think that this is interesting, and I think that this can also lead us into the next area where this is important, where knowing and understanding your user leads you to have a better team dynamic. And this point that you guys just mentioned about uh, both switching from cola and sodas towards water, and then talking a little bit about the benefits and I guess some of the disadvantages of bottled water as well. This helps to guide the team dynamic. uh, it's very difficult for a lot of teams to find the right type of focus and the right type of pacing to reach the market on time. And if you lack user research, it can be very difficult to distinguish what are the company activities and what are the company goals that actually drive customer value and the activities that don't. So your user research is going to help you not only with the product design and then the messaging for your sales and marketing, but all of the other activities, including finance, accounting, and the legal team. All of them have to be aligned so that the work that they are doing, what are your billing practices? What are your contracts? What are the terms and conditions that you're offering to your customers? All of these type of activities are also part of the user experience, and they are part of how the users will judge the overall service that they're getting from you and whether or not they want to continue doing business with you. And so I think that it's also kind of important to think a little bit more about what are the team dynamic that lead to the decisions in product design and messaging and in other aspects of the user experience. And I think that this is true for consumer markets, and it's also true for technical markets. If you're selling a technology product for the enterprise sector, people will be interacting with much more than just the technical aspects of your product. They will be interacting with multiple people within your company. And it's from that experience that they will make a purchasing decision. So Jose, you worked with Osram previously. Now you're in MIT. You're in touch with a lot of corporations. You know, one question that I'm wondering, in your experience with the corporations that you deal, whenever they are buying new and innovative products, to what extent do they make decisions based on the technology, the technical merits of the product? And to what extent do they make decisions based on their interaction with the team selling the product?
I would say I've seen a range, and unfortunately, I've seen too many cases where a company has tried to take a technology, a product, a concept, and fit it into the market, you know, because it's a great technology. It's like, oh wow, we figured out a way to do something on a screen. I don't know, let's say whatever, some kind of touch screen functionality, which is amazing, at least seems amazing. And then you try to, you know, put it in the market. And I've had my share of discussions where my question has been, has anybody gone to talk to people about this outside of this company? Right? Has anybody talked to our, you know, maybe our not necessarily our competitors, but our partners, you know, suppliers, distributors, you know, salespeople, anybody outside of the group that's coming up with a solution? That is turning around, I think, in many companies, but I would say that it still happens quite a bit where there's this pride of ownership, right? You built something, you created it, so you think it's fantastic, and somebody tells you it's no good. It hurts, but it really has to be, I think, almost like the basic step has to be find the customer desires, pains, preferences, then work from those, and then find solutions, and then not worry as much about the technological piece. You know, of course, you know, there's certain areas that you have a expertise in, you know, so hopefully that helps. But really,
have you ever encountered a case where the technology and the product actually matches, and the company, the organization wants to adopt it, but once they start looking at the terms of the contract that is being proposed, there's a mismatch in expectations, and for that reason, the deal doesn't go through?
Sure. So, for example, there can be situations where you've done some level of user research, and you've done some prototyping, you've tested something out, it has a good reception, at least with the audience that you have looked at. And then it comes time to make a commitment to it. And usually that means money, right? Whether you're going to ramp up production facilities, or let's say one example, you're thinking, okay, I think I need to hire a market research firm, because you need a third-party validation of what you're doing, especially if you're going to invest a lot. And that's where sometimes things get dropped because there is this um, there's apprehension, there's uncertainty. Really, do I need you mean I need to spend all this money up front before I even build anything or before I take it to the next step? And that's a difficult mindset to break, which is that sometimes that investment you make up front in market research that tells you that you are completely wrong could save you a lot of money down the road.
Right. Um, and I think that overall, that last part where it could save you a lot of money down the road, if you're a large organization, uh, you could be in a position where saving a lot of money can make a difference, for your job, for your prospects. However, if you're a startup, quote unquote, saving money down the road is the difference between staying in business and just going
Mhm.
out of business. Uh, at the end of the day, you've got a combination, as any new company has a combination of resources in terms of time and money, and you've got very limited amount of both of those. Uh, and so that user research in the whole process, from your product to your messaging to the entire team dynamic that affects all of the interactions that customers will have while trying to buy or use or get support for the product, then when you do the right kind of research, you'll be able to really narrow down the key activities that you need to do, the core components that you need to deliver, and it will help your entire team to focus and get something to the market. So we've got an interesting case of getting something to the market. And this is the Mass General Brigham Center for COVID Innovation. And they put together an innovation center. Of course, this is very closely related to the pandemic. And because the pandemic really has become such a salient issue in only the last 2 months, for them to get from prototype to production, it had to be very, very quick. We're talking about a healthcare market. We're talking about clinical use within a hospital. So this is definitely not, some kind of prototype that they're just using in somebody's backyard. These are fully professional um, prototypes that they had to build and they had to produce. And in fact, they have been able, now that we're in April, the Center for COVID Innovation started around the beginning of March. The first town hall was on March 20th, which was the town hall for devices. And now that we are at the end of April, just about last week, they reached production stage on some of the medical devices that they were prototyping. So it's really possible to do this entire range of activities and get something out to the market where you do your research, your prototyping, and your basic assessments, and get something out to the market in a usable state in less than 1 month. So we can visit the website really quickly. By now, this website has been fully designed. This website itself has taken just about a month and a half to complete. The very first activity that they tried to do, from devices, diagnostics, and data and analytics, was devices. So they held a virtual town hall, and this virtual town hall served two purposes. Purpose number one was to explain to people what they wanted to do. So this is a YouTube video that lasts just about 50 minutes, and they give a presentation on what they perceived to be the immediate needs. They followed this town hall meeting with a survey of the people who had attended to try to understand what were the critical areas that needed people's attention. And shortly after that, within a week, they had launched these different working groups for face shields, for full body protection, for N95 respirators, reuse surgical masks, swabs, and ventilators. Swabs came a little bit later. And what's interesting about these working groups is that, well, this is a large center for innovation. At Mass General is one hospital and Brigham and Women's is another hospital. Both of these hospitals are working together. But each single one of these is actually made up of much smaller task forces. So if we go into devices for full body protection, they have been prototyping and producing a few devices like these protective booths and like these patient isolation hoods. The actual team that is working on these devices is just a handful of people. It's pretty much at the level of a startup team. surely you have a whole bunch of teams working on all of these different areas, and then they're able to produce many prototypes across a large number of working groups. But the actual teams that are working on a day-to-day basis on these different devices, the booth, for example, you really had a group of 4 to 5 people that were leading the design, leading the prototyping, making sure that they are getting all of the information that they need from the front of the line clinical workers, and getting, you know, the basic components together to develop these. And as we can see now, about from 1 month, they have gone from prototyping to validation to manufacturing and to distribution. And in every single step of the way, in all of these, the basic interactions with the customer and the user research has been, you know, a critical process to reach every single step. So Jose, you and I were talking about this briefly before we started the call, right? And there
Yeah,
was,
because I had seen these in some of the posts about Korea, about Korean clinics doing this a while back.
and so one of the steps for doing user research was to go and reach out and to search for other hospitals. Have other hospitals faced this problem, and what have they done? I am part of this working group, so I do know for a fact that the personal protective booths, to a large extent, were they were designed. They were largely influenced by booths that were in use in Korea that had been deployed 1 month earlier, and this team reached out to that hospital immediately. They're like, "Hey, you're using these booths. What has been your experience? And can we get some feedback from the front of the line workers that have been using these booths so that we can understand what are the key design elements that we need to target?" So, you know, I think that it's a little bit telling people that this was 1 month from prototype to production. Well, yes, especially if you're leveraging the experience that other people have had. The booth was one of the first ones. And one of the reasons why they were they were actually prototyping the booth by week 2. And by week 3, they were testing it on sites. And now it has reached the production stage. So that was definitely influenced by South Korea. The other one, the patient isolation hood that is scrolling through here, that was a completely internal and new design. And that was something that they were talking about. They found this from doing surveys internally for people that had already been treating respiratory disease before, as well as the ones that had started to see the COVID cases. And the problem is, when you are intubating somebody, you've got to put a tube into their throat. And at some point, you've got to take that tube out. And when you take the tube out, people start coughing a lot. And the problem, obviously, if you got a tube in your throat, is you can't have any kind of mask or anything on the person, right? You're taking the tube out, they're just going to cough into the general environment. Normally, most healthcare workers do have their own mask, they have their own protective equipment. But now that there's a shortage, the question was, how do we contain this? How do we contain the coughing and the spitting that happens when we intubate people, put things in and out of their throat? And this is a completely new design. So Jose, when you look at that design for the patient isolation hood, what's the first thing that you notice?
That it's hardware store tubing that you can put together and glue. You buy the PVC glue and put it together, buy a few elbows and some tees, and boom, you're done. I mean, and so here's one. We're always enamored by all these prototyping technologies like 3D printing. Oh, we could 3D print it. So like here's a comment for you. So let's say you're prototyping something. You're trying to have your concept that you have of a plant. That is you have a kind of your personalized plant that has its own mini environment. Now, would you love to have it like 3D printed like that?
Well,
I mean, I don't know, realistically, if you had the capability and you had like this great
sure,
team,
capable,
right?
If I have enough time and energy to do that, Yeah, I'd love to.
If you could tell somebody, hey, can you 3D print me this thing, and they say yes, you'd be like, yeah, but and unfortunately, we get and kind of get these we get all the shiny objects that we get distracted by, instead of saying, his and saying, you know what, I'm going to walk down the street to my hardware store. I'm going to buy a couple of pipes, and I'm going to get some tape and a flashlight, and I'm going to put it on top, and done. There's my prototype. So this is precisely what prototyping should be about, which is, whatever you can get as quickly as you can get it, test it out, refine, iterate, and improve, and then send it out.
Now that actual prototype, it's meant for in-hospital use, and they are sharing the plans with other people so that they can build their own. Nevertheless, Jose, do you think that if that were a commercial product available for sale, do you think people would buy it? Do you think hospitals would buy that one as it is?
As it is, well, on the current environment, yes. Right. Under normal circumstances, you have the safety officer come in and say, this is not, sanitary, or this is not, UL listed, approved, or CE approved, or FDA approved, and so on and so on and so forth. So I think on the normal circumstances, probably not. But these are extraordinary circumstances. But that just shows you how many obstacles sometimes we find to find a solution.
By the way, in this validation stage, it does include getting emergency FDA approval. So it is true that under the current environment, the FDA is being a lot faster to approve things that they normally wouldn't. So it is a special circumstance, but that part of the user research process does also go through, some of these basic steps to know and understand, do we need emergency use approval, or are we operating under the guidelines that we can go ahead and deploy this with like the implicit blessing of the FDA that we are doing the right thing? And what you mentioned, I think, is really important is, would people buy it? Well, it depends on how critical the need is. Right now, under the current condition, I'm sure hospitals, if you had that and they're like, yeah, sure, I'll pay $200 for you to assemble something like that, especially if it meets these requirements that the FDA has said, that's okay. That has emergency approval. And I think that the same is going to be true for almost all markets. If you are really addressing a critical need, they'll take the ugly version. You might have to, because it's such an easy and simple prototype, you wouldn't be able to charge $2,000 for that, right? You'd probably, be charging the cost of parts plus a little bit extra for assembly and delivery. But if you really are serving a critical need for the market, in this case, it's COVID innovation, but within the corporate sector or for consumers, that's also the case. People will pay for, early prototypes, and they will pay for the benefit of being able to use them. And a critical part is to communicate with them that it is an early prototype, right? What their pricing doesn't complete, but many users will take a less than optimal product experience if they feel that their needs as users are being taken into account, and that you are going to be responsible ultimately for the successful use of the product. So if we look at, I guess one last question for you, Jose, that you work with a lot of corporations as well. How often do you see corporations deploy prototypes and even early products that are essentially built on hardware store supplies?
Oh no, no, you don't really see that. Not under normal circumstances. There's too many safety requirements that have to be met. Too many, product safety liability issues. So yeah, typically that just, it's not something that you see on a normal course of business.
So how could a new company bridge the gap between having a hardware store prototype that they want to use for user testing with, let's say, a large corporate customer, and eventually get to the point where they have a purchase order.
Hmm. It comes down to that story that you have based on your customer empathy, on your customer, or your user research. If you have a compelling enough story and a prototype of some sort, in some cases the prototype is a concept more than anything, but you need either a partner to provide investment, that's one area, or simply to provide the laboratories or the space that you can actually test out your concept. That's where a startup can make a pitch to a large corporation for some kind of collaboration, and that happens all the time. And you have a startup that will have a concept that is not yet scaled up. It can handle, let's say, if it's a software application, it can only handle a limited number of users, let's say, but you need to scale it up and you need to be able to test it. And a company, large corporate, who is interested in that particular technology would become your partner in that. Of course,
Right.
it can be a joint venture. It can be, there's many different formats, and you can really start with basic off-the-shelf components. It's
Right.
the story that will sell, because people with imagination and with people who are good at what they do in terms of product development, they can see if something has merit or not.
So you might not be able to sell as a final product something that's
Oh,
integrated with off-the-shelf parts.
Right.
However, what you are saying is that you could sell, let's say, quote unquote, sell yourself to do a partnership with the corporation, where the first step is to do a proof of concept with off-the-shelf components together with their internal team and maybe some very, very limited end user testing.
It may be that the company produces a certain module that eliminates like this whole big box that you had to kind of come up with yourself. And this
Right.
company has a very little module that does all those functions, and therefore, yeah, for you it's just plug and play now, and
Right.
that potentially opens a market for the company, for the large corporate, to sell this particular piece of hardware or software, whatever it is that you're trying to develop. And so everybody wins. You get a better product and a better prototype to do some validation, and the customer has a potential new market.
And one thing that you just inspired me to realize is that there's 2 layers to user testing in that case, because you got to do your to user research. You got to do your user research on the corporation that you're approaching, and for you to know what kind of story you need to approach them with, you've got to do user research on their customers, so that you can tell the company, if you adopt what I am offering to you, then your customers will like it, and it will open a new revenue stream, a new opportunity for your own business. So I put together a few resources here that I think people can follow to fully develop this user research process. There's a book, Talking to Humans. This was written by an author called Cliff Constable. And you can read this book probably, if you're a fast reader, you could get it done in like half a day. More likely that you want to take your time and read it a little at a time over the course of 1 week. But it's a very, very approachable book, and it helps you understand how to approach users when you want to do user research, so that you can get real feedback from them about their real problems that can help you understand how you can approach them as a target market. The second resource here is the Design Kit by IDEO, and IDEO has a full range of experiments and processes that you can run with end users, so that you can in fact gain empathy with them. Empathy, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. How do you empathize with your customer and fully understand not just their technical needs, but their emotional and their social and their intellectual needs as well, so that the comprehensive packaging, the comprehensive product design, and the entire user experience, including their interactions with sales and support, that all of those are positive and they are fulfilling the customer's needs. And then the last link here is the Growth Driven Design Tool Stack. And it's not, in the past, if you wanted to do user research, you had to do a lot of face-to-face interviews and focus groups with a small number of people. Now that we have the internet, you can use digital tools to do behavioral research on a very large segment of the population. And this means you've got to set up a website, some basic social media accounts, run analytics, and do both surveys where you're asking people for their direct responses, as well as behavioral tracking where you're observing how they behave when you present them with different options. So all of these people can, we'll leave the links on below the video, and people will be able to access them. Talking to Humans takes days to read, I would say weeks to months to implement. Design Kit and Growth Driven Design Tool Stack takes weeks to understand, months to begin implementing, but you could really make a career out of it. These are very, very comprehensive tools that can take you anywhere from 3, 5, 7 years to actually master. So I'd like to leave it there for today. That's all the time that we have. Jose, Semen, and Hassan, do you guys have any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Well, I mean, it's like the last point you said, Mario. It's always easy to say, yeah, you have to empathize. Well, I'm empathizing with you guys. What happens next, right? But actually having the tools to implement is, I think, the crucial part. And actually implement the business, how, like you said, the technology side, on the emotional side and the social side, how do you actually empathize with them, and how do you use that to grow your business is a really important part. I really want to emphasize the last part.
Right. Hassan? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. So whether you're an engineer or whether you're a sales rep or whether you're UX designer, I think it's really important to understand what your actual customer needs and desires. So I think those tools are very good first step to actually implement it. So try to use it. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask us on our forum, on our social media. So yeah.
And yeah, and I'm glad Mario put these items here, and especially like books, right? Somebody has done this, has taken the time to learn it really well, and has documented it. It's almost like they've done you a favor. It's like, here, this is all the stuff I learned about, empathy with customers. Here, take a look. I spent 5 years doing this. They just saved you 5 years.
Right.
The same thing with what Hassan just said, which is to reach out to a group like this, which is, we have been working in different areas. We have expertise in different areas, and some of us have read a whole host of different books and looked at all kinds of webinars, and so there's a lot of knowledge that someone else can then tap on to and take it on from here. So I think certainly do not be intimidated by asking questions, and certainly look into learning, especially from books and other resources that have distilled all this knowledge for you to take kind of bypass all that get a quick learning curve on those things.
Right.
I just mentioned that it's, I'm sorry. I just mentioned that it's very good first step, but actually they also have very practical and very useful tips. Like you have to conduct your interview in some amount of time like that. So it'll help you a lot to make your customer feel free, and of course for you too.
Right. Because ultimately it's a little bit of an art and a science. There are, and having the right kind of technical setup will make sure that you get those softer aspects of your user research and your human interaction just right. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us this week. That's all the time that we have for today. And we'll see you again next week with another episode. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.